Graphing sine and cosine functions. Today, what we're going to do is we are going to look at what happens if you look at all four of these numbers. So on Friday, we talked about the 3. What does the 3 do? Starts with an A, amplitude. Yeah, it affects how high it goes and how low it goes. And the 2, that impacted the period. We had this formula, it was 2 pi divided by b, right? So today we're going to look at how do we actually shift it. So we're going to look at horizontal shifts and vertical shifts. The amplitude is the absolute value of A. The period is 2 pi divided by b. In order to determine the horizontal shift and the vertical shift, we have to look at these outside pieces. The vertical shift is this guy right here. Just identify D, and that's your vertical shift. Nice and easy. And then the horizontal shift, right there. We need to solve bx minus c is equal to 0. If we can solve bx minus c is equal to 0, then we can determine the horizontal shift. Now, I have taught this for many years. It's very, very important to try to figure out a way that works best for everybody. If you find out a way that works best for you, you go right ahead. What I found is it's best if people kind of take this approach. Start with the vertical shift first, then the amplitude, and then the period. After that, we'll get to the horizontal shift. So let's try that with example B right here. This should be the 3 cosine of x plus 2. As you see the x here, we'll put parentheses around that. That's what I intended, just didn't come out when I printed it out. My bad. But you can see that we have a value off on the outside, and that would be your vertical shift, a vertical shift of 2. And then I have my amplitude. After I do the vertical shift, I do the amplitude. Why? Because those are both vertical components. What's the amplitude? It is 3. So let's just understand what is happening here with the graph. Don't draw this, but I want you to get the idea. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is what the graph used to look like, right? We would go up to positive 3 and down to negative 3. Well, if it shifted 2 units, now it's going to go up to 5, and it will only go down to negative 1. You see that? If we take this one right here, which is at 3, and this at negative 3, everything's going to move up 2 units. So now we'll go up to 5, and this spot will go up to negative 1. That's what's going to happen there. So when we start to mark this out, you just take your vertical shift and you add 3 and subtract 3 from it. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then down 1. So I have 5 and negative 1, and I have that vertical shift of positive 2. Everybody okay with that? I draw this axis to just show where I rotate off of. What is the period? It's 2 pi. Sorry, 2 pi. Negative 2 pi. As far as the horizontal shift, there is none. As you look at the inside there, it's just x. If it was x minus 2, then the horizontal shift would be 2. If it was x plus 3, the horizontal shift would be negative 3. So you don't have anything on the inside there other than the x, so there is no horizontal shift. So as I graph this, cosine starts either at the maximum or the minimum. Do you think it will start at the max or the min? The max because it's positive, so I start up at 5, cross over the middle, get to the bottom, and head back up. So this is exactly what we did on Friday. The difference is that the graph on Friday sat like that. It was from +3 to -3, and now we've moved the entire graph up 2 units, so it's sitting at +5 and -1. Any question there? Question going once, twice, thrice. Okay, let's look at this one now. Is there a vertical shift here? There's nothing on the outside. The vertical shift is 0. What's the amplitude? 1. So there's no vertical shift, so I start at 0, and from 0 I go up 1 and down 1. So up 1 and down 1. So all the vertical part of the graph is already taken care of. What's the period? 2 pi. Take 2 pi divided by b. B is the value that sits in front of x, so I mark off 2 pi. Horizontal shift. I take the inside and solve it equal to 0. X minus pi over 4 is equal to 0. So x equals pi over 4. So the horizontal shift is pi over 4. Now, before we actually sketch this graph, before we do the horizontal shift, I encourage everybody at this point to pause and sketch a ghost graph. The horizontal shift is very challenging for many people to apply right now. And so I think it's most helpful if we sketch a ghost graph. And I call it a ghost graph because it's not the actual graph, it's the graph that helps us sketch the correct graph. So forget about the pi over 4, forget about all together, just focus on the green. Where will this graph start? Starts at 0, we'll start by going up or down? Up. So I'm going to make my sketch, but instead of drawing a solid graph, I'm just going to draw a dashed graph. So the horizontal shift of pi over 4. Pi over 4 is how many tick marks? Half of 1 tick mark. If you look, it says pi over 2 is 1 tick mark, so pi over 4 would be half of that. So I'm going to take each of these points, and I'll move it over half of a tick mark. As I move them over half of a tick mark, it gives me the better set of points to use. And hopefully the red graph looks like a really good translation of the blue graph. Just translated pi over 4 units to the right. In fact, if I grab onto this red graph and just slide it on back, you can see how perfectly it overlaps with the other one. Griffin liked that, didn't you, Griff? Thanks, buddy. You're doing a great job. We probably won't be able to finish all the notes before lunch, but we'll be able to get very close to the last one. Let's do C together and put all these 3 pieces or 4 pieces together. Vertical shift for letter C. Nope. Try again. Down 2, -2. What is the amplitude? 4. So let's think about this. If it shifted down 2 and the amplitude is 4, what's the lowest point that the graph will reach? -6. It's down 2, and it's going to go down 4 more, so down to -6. Now, if I'm at -2 and I go up 4, that will bring me to +2. So my highest point will be +2. My lowest point will be -6. So I'm going to mark off 2, and then 2, 4, 6. I'm going to draw an axis right through 2. I can see my maximum spot of 2, my minimum spot of -6. So I have my vertical shift, I have my amplitude. What is the period? The period is 2. How'd you get 2? 2 pi divided by pi. Pi's canceled, so I mark off 2. A half. A fourth. No, that was dumb. Stop being stupid, Mr. Gens. True or false? I have a horizontal shift. True. Yep. So at this point, before I find the horizontal shift, I'm going to sketch a ghost graph. Where am I going to start? I start down at -6. Cosine starts at the max or the min. So because it's negative, it will start at the minimum. I head on up. It says that pi x minus 1, I set that equal to 0, and then that can tell me what my horizontal shift will be. So if I add the 1, I get pi x is equal to 1. Divide by pi, I get x is 1 over pi. Or the horizontal shift is approximately 0.3 units. Notice, because my axis was written in terms that did not involve pi, I then wrote my horizontal shift not as 1 over pi, but as a decimal, or 0.3. How much of a tick mark is 0.3? Yeah, just a little bit more than a half, right? So take all these and just move them a little bit more than a half unit over. All right, we are very glad everybody had a good lunch. Um, we can still see by looking into Michaela's eyes that she is not back to 100% yet. And we thank you for being a tough person here and getting back to school. And we hope you continue to feel better and enjoy that piece of gum. So let's go through this last one together. Some people kind of got a start on it. Let's see what you came up with. The amplitude, or let's start with the vertical shift. Vertical shift is 3. The amplitude is 1. So, folks, if it shifted up 3 units, and then the amplitude is 1, what's the highest point? What's the lowest point? Yeah, 4 to 2. So from 3, it goes up 1 and down 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 to 2. So the vertical structure of the graph is taken care of. What is the period? Pi. So I take 2 pi divided by 2, I get pi. And is there a horizontal shift? There is. What is the horizontal shift? Pi over 4. Right? If we take 2x minus pi over 2 is equal to 0, we have 2x is equal to pi over 2. We divide by 2 or multiply by a half. If you multiply by a half, you can see you get pi over 4. Pi over 4 is one whole tick mark. So I'll first sketch the ghost graph. It's sine, so is it going to start at 2, 3, or 4? 3. It's going to start in the middle. Go ahead, up or down? Down. And now I shift everything how far? One tick mark. If we were to sketch that graph on our calculator, that would be a very accurate depiction of this sine graph. Again, apologize for your assignment. I should have made it so it was just on the front and the back, but you can take the first 2 problems, and they actually say example 1 and example 2. The first 2 problems say example 1, example 2. You can get rid of those. You don't have to do those first 2. My apologies. I used to use those as kind of notes, more or less, as opposed to actual problems. So, yep, cross those first 2 out, and you have the rest of the time. So you can probably get more than half of this done. Tomorrow's lesson is shorter and easier. I aim to please.